Good evening, everyone.
I'm very pleased to welcome Sherman Clark, the Kirkland and Ellis Professor of Law at the University of Michigan, to campus for the first on-campus Graduate Institute summer lecture. Instead of a regular academic introduction, I'd like to say a word about why I'm so excited and honored that Sherman has come to campus. This alternative introduction starts from Professor Clark's description of tonight's lecture, which has been circulated, but which I'll read again. When scholars talk about Patroclus, they usually focus on his relationship with Achilles. But Patroclus is more than a sidekick and source of motivation. In fact, he is often called the best of the Achaeans. But what could that possibly mean? Patroclus is not the strongest, richest, or most powerful, those being common components of Homeric excellence. So, in what sense, Professor Clark continues, is Patroclus the best? In this lecture, we will take a good look at Patroclus and will give him a good listen. And this, I hope, may help us think about what it might mean to be the best, even when you are not the strongest, richest, or most powerful, even in a world where those things can seem to matter most. I remember being very struck by one phrase of that description in particular, the phrase, "We will give him a good listen." And I hope Professor Clark does not think ill of me when I confess that I simply assumed that he had included it for rhetorical effect, as a way of merely closing and balancing the phrase immediately prior. We will take a good look at Patroclus. Look alone, I thought, would have sufficed, but it's a nice effect to say look and listen. Over the past several days, however, I've had the pleasure of reading some of Professor Clark's scholarship, and I've come to see just how shallow and ungenerous my first reading of that phrase, "We will give him a good listen," was. The phenomenon of listening to texts, to one another, to ourselves, centrally structures, as I understand it, so much of Professor Clark's writing. And he is so deeply sensitive to the phenomenon of listening, its promises, its pleasures, its pitfalls. Giving Patroclus a good listen was decidedly not included for rhetorical effect. It was, I came to see, a way of thinking about texts and their address to us. St. John's is often called the talking college for the value we place on conversation, but we could and perhaps should just as well think of ourselves as the listening college. For it, listening, like Professor Clark, is singularly attentive to hearing clearly the voices emanating from books and from those reading them. And so I find this an especially fine pairing this evening, Sherman Clark at St. John's College. And I thank my colleague and predecessor as Associate Dean for Graduate Programs, Emily Langston, for having extended the invitation to Professor Clark. And I ask Professor Clark's forgiveness for this untraditional introduction. I'm very grateful for the opportunity now to listen to him, and perhaps more importantly, to listen with him to what Patroclus has to say, mindful of the difficulties involved in listening, but confident that he, with his understanding of listening, will help us hear more clearly. And so, with that, let us listen to Sherman Clark, Kirkland and Ellis Professor of Law at the University of Michigan, on the best of the Achaeans, Patroclus in the Iliad.
You're not supposed to make the introduction more profound than the talk. What have I got to do now? That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for showing up in the rain, for being here, for listening to me. So if we were to go back about 2,500 years, we'd be in the height of Athens and Sparta and Socrates and Aristotle, but that's not where we're going. We're going before that. Now, if we were to go 800 years before that, we'd be at another high point, the Mycenaean Empire, palaces and Crete and huge wealth but that's not where we're going. We're not going that far back. We're going to a place between those two that scholars sometimes call the Greek Dark Ages. And then other people say, it wasn't dark, it wasn't dark. Okay, I don't want to fight with the scholars. But there was a period about 800 BC when the Greeks had lost a lot of what they had. They had forgotten how to write. They had a language called Linear B. They used it to count their money. That's the main thing they used it for, count their money and their wealth and their corn. But something had happened, some combination of things, and the historians still argue, did they over-farm the land? They did some of that. Did they kill each other? Was it disease? A bunch of stuff happened, but they had become diminished. They were living, not the Dark Ages, they didn't think of it that way. They had their towns, their cities, they herded their goats, and they grew their stuff, and they fought with each other and did a little trading, but they didn't have what they used to have. They didn't have their writing. They didn't have their wealth. And they look around and they see the ruins. They see the tore up palaces, and they knew that they once had been greatness there. They had the ruins and they had the stories. They had stories about those great times. That's what they had. And they had lots of stories. We have, by combination of accident or merit, or the scholars like to argue about why exactly, but we have a couple of stories in particular, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were central, but they had others. They had stories. That's what they had. And the storytellers would travel around and they would tell the stories. The stories recreated imagined stories that look back to this imagined time of greatness that they thought was represented by the ruins that they saw at Troy and Crete. And those stories are the Iliad and the Odyssey. So that's where these poems come from. They were an oral tradition. The storytellers would go around from town to town and they would tell the stories. And they wouldn't just tell them randomly. They told them in a particular way. They told them accompanied by music, which we cannot recreate at this point. And they told them in a particular meter, the heroic hexameter. They used a particular meter to tell the stories, and it was consistent, the meter, and then they would vary it like jazz musicians would vary the basic thing, right? So it was the dactylic hexameter, but with variations. So the dactyl's like boom, 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 because like a finger has long, short, short, long dactyl's finger. Boom, 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 boom. And the last one was always cut off, boom, boom. And they would vary it. Sometimes it'd be boom, 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 like that. It was the rhythm of the beat with the music. And they had pitch variations. We can't recreate those either. We could hardly really try to recreate what it sounded like. In Greece, modern Greeks use their pronunciation. When they recite ancient Greek, it sounds very funny because they have all the vowels have collapsed and they say the same thing. The rest of the world uses an attempt to recreate a little bit of it, but it's almost as if like, I don't know, like whatever your favorite concert was, rock and roll concert, Jay-Z or whatever, can you imagine like some old professor reciting the lyrics? That's how little we can catch of it, but somehow it's still awesome, right? So I just wrote a couple lines just because it's fun to see it, and I could talk all day about the verse and the poetry. We're gonna get to the substance, but like I just wanted to show you some of it, right? Because it's neat. And these two lines are from the Iliad, from book 17 of the Iliad, and they refer to Patroclus, Nike de Troy, victory is of the Trojans, Pephatai, do Aristos, Achaeon. The best of the Achaeans has been killed. richest, Patroclus, megale de pathos, dana oisi te tuktai, great pathos, sadness comes to the Achaeans because Patroclus has been killed. And then I put this line, it's from the Odyssey. The other line's actually from the Odyssey, and I just wanted to put that in there because it has an important phrase and because it's very metrically regular. So it's kind of it's good to see the line, right? So just to take 2 minutes to grapple with a little bit. It reads like this: Ton amothen gathea thugater dios epe kai heimen. That's the line. Ton amothen gathea thugater dios epe kai heimen. It's from the invocation to the muse at the beginning of the Odyssey. And the poet has just said, Andra nepe musa, pola trupan, speak to us of the man of twists and turns, and tell us about Odysseus. This is the beginning of the Odyssey. And then, ton, partitive genitive, from wherever, of, among these things. Amothen means like wherever. It kind of means wherever. It's like a weird adverb. It means like from wherever you want. Like start in the middle of the story if you want to, muse. Goddess, thea, word, theology. We recognize some of this. This theta has the th sound, right? This looks like a W. The omega has a long O sound. Ton, amothen, thugater, that's daughter. Dios, genitive of Zeus. Thugater, Dios, daughter of Zeus. That's the muse. Start from wherever you want, muse. And then the last 2 lines of every single line in Homer, all 15,000 lines of the Iliad, all 12,000 lines of the Odyssey, end boom, 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 boom. There's variation everywhere else, but the last two feet. The last 2 feet, boom, 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 always end like that. So it always comes home like with that repetition. And that, epe kai heimen. And another feature, I just want to tell you one of the features of the verse, is a lot of repetition that ties it together. The repeated lines are like the threads that bring it all together. So when you're listening to it, you see the same lines. Like every time before they're going to argue, they always like eat before they talk. They always eat before they either argue. And then they say like this, they say, hota de patias kaya datos exeranento. When they put aside desire for food and drink, then they start talking. They use that same line a lot of times. And one of my favorite is like when somebody's about to say something important, here's like, allo de toi ereo, kai en fresi balio seisen. Allo, something else, de toi, to you, ereo, I will say, kai en fresi, and in your heart, balio, put it. Balio seisen, I'm gonna tell you something else, put it in your heart. So these lines repeat. So you get this kind of music with and people knew the stories, they knew the lines, okay? So you think you'd go to your favorite concert, whatever, of a band you saw 30 years ago and 20 years ago, and you know the songs, but it doesn't matter because you want the songs to, okay. Enough about the verse. We could really talk about just how cool it is and how fun it is to read. I want to get to the substance of the topic with my 2 cents, right? Because like I have my 2 cents, I can't just enjoy the poem. Okay, so this line, epe kai heimen, speak, that's the imperative, speak. Kai means and or also. Heimen, that's a dative, plural, for us, to us. So speak also to us. But heimen can have like a substantive, so that could also mean like speak about us. Or even speak about our stuff. Or like Robert Fagles, he's a little more poet than translator. He likes to kind of wing it. He says like, he does, right? But he's good, right? But he says, speak to our time too. But the point is that this line is saying, speak to us. Now, this is every generation. Your picture there in the 700 BC, they think they're hearing a story about 1200 BC, okay? Don't just speak also to us. But how does it speak to them when they're very different? How does it speak to us? Okay, so and we talk about the stories, the basics, the poetry. Here's the problem. One way in which these poems might speak to us, okay? One way. I will warn you, I do not have a solution. I only have a problem, okay? I only have a question. Look, that poetry, epics, literature, they, in my view, can give us a fresh look at a problem, help us wrestle with a problem, but I don't read great books like, oh, the moral of the story, now I've solved the problem, okay? That's not, okay. Maybe that's just me. I'm telling you, I'm gonna tell you a problem I can't solve, okay? But maybe the poet can help us think about it. So the problem is how to live well in a jacked up world, okay? So I'm gonna tell you how their version of the problem, and I'm gonna suggest that we have a different version of the same problem, and then we're gonna see what Patroclus can tell us about how one wrestles with that problem, okay? And what do I mean? The world of the characters in the Iliad, and to a large extent, the world of the goat herders listening to the Iliad stories in the Greek Dark Ages, okay, valued certain things. They had certain ways of defining what it means to have success. What counts as success? What does it mean to make it? Like you want your kids, I hope your kid has success. What does that mean? What did that mean to them? To them, it meant some combination of military glory, wealth, also eloquence, grace, but really like reputation for military badassery, right? Reputation for military glory. That was what it means to succeed in that world, okay? Now, in a sense, that was just a fact of necessity, because in the imagined world of the epics and in the real world of the goat-herding epic listeners, if you didn't have a reputation for honor and sticking up for your family, you were going to get in a bad way, because they would just come take your goats and your family. Okay, this is true. Anthropologists have studied this. I'm not going to get off track here, but every place where people have to herd goats in the mountains, they have strong honor codes and will fight you over nothing, whether it's Scotland, Greece, Sicily, or Tennessee. They will fight you over an insult in those places because there's long cultural tradition, because if you're herding your goats up in the middle of nowhere, any three dudes can just come take your goats. And then it's totally not worth it for you to chase them all over the mountains to get your goats back. You probably won't find them, and if you do, it's too late. So they know, like, if you were rational, they could just take your goats. So in order to survive in those worlds, you have to convince, I am not rational. I will chase you and get my goats to the ends of the earth, right? Okay, so that's reputation for military toughness and success in battle and a constellation of things. That was what success meant. And they weren't free to discard it either pragmatically or, and here's the deeper part, they didn't see it as a construct. Okay, like we talk about things as social construct, race is a social construct, but when you're in it, you don't see it as a construct. When you're in a thing, you just see it as a thing. Like gender, people think, no, there's just gender. We're now learning, no, actually, we just made that up, right? Race, there's a thing. There's black people and white people, obviously. No, we made that up too. We didn't it's a thing that does work in the world, but it's but you don't see it when you're in it. So the characters at least, just thought that's what success kind of is. They didn't think like in our culture, we've decided by accident, no, that's what it means to be a great person. That's what it means to be great, is to be a person who has glory in battle and the other people are afraid of. That's just what success means, okay? And a tragedy in the Iliad is that sometimes they realize it's inadequate. But they can't even, not only can't they escape it, they can't even imagine their way out of it. Like Achilles in book 9, he's like, this is stupid. But all he could do is like just keep being petulant. He just can't think his way out of it. Or even worse, oh my God. Okay, book 6, Hector. Hector's fixing to go fight, okay? Okay? He talks to his wife Andromache and their little baby. Okay? He's like, got to go fight. He's like, don't go fight. You're going to get killed. I got to go fight. I'm Hector. Okay, don't go. You're going to get killed. I'm going to get killed too, and everyone's going to get killed. I have to do it. It's my honor. And then, so you see that he's trapped, both pragmatically, because if he doesn't fight, then the Greeks are just going to take over Troy, and also like by his conception of honor. But then, he goes to pick up his little baby son, and he still has a big giant helmet. They call him like Corthiolus Hector. That's the big helmeted Hector, big head Hector. And his baby cries because he's got this big helmet on. He laughs. He takes the big helmet off. He and his wife chuckle, and then the baby's happy because, oh, it's daddy. And he picks up the baby. It's so sweet. It's like a little domestic scene in the middle of a mess, right? And then he says, oh, my son, here's what I hope for you, my son. I hope that someday you will drag the bloody armor of your enemies back from battle. He can't, that's just what success means. That's all he can even imagine, right? So stuck in it. Not only, and then they realize that it's not adequate. Like, this is not making me happy. They don't say it that way, right? But in various ways, they're like, this is not bringing me fulfillment. This is not, what? I don't like this. And the poem makes us feel that. It makes us feel both the attraction of the battle, oh, go get him, but also, what is this? And then sometimes they realize not only is it inadequate, but it's horrible. It comes at a cost. I mean, the way you win that reputation is you got to like murder like lots of people. And like, they realize that sometimes too. And then they're like, nah, I'm not gonna think about that. So they sometimes see both its inadequacy and its terribleness, or its terrible of the complicity, the terribleness in which they're complicit when they seek glory in that way, okay? But they can't imagine their way out of it, okay? So we're gonna come to Patroclus in a second. But I just want to suggest that we have a variation of the same problem, okay? That we are given a set of terms on which we are asked to define success, okay? And it's like, I can't define it precisely any more than I could define their terms, but it's something like a good job and a good house and a good degree and like kind of respect and like the right kind of, not only material, but a material component. It's financial, it's professional, good job, whatever it is that you want to be able to tell your like aunt that your nephew is successful or whatever it is I hope they have success, that young couple. There's a set of ways in which our culture gives us to define success. And sometimes we realize they're not adequate. Now, I'm not saying this is a problem that needs to keep you up all night or paralyze you, but it's a thing. Like, a lot of people can avoid it. You can avoid it because if you are unable to achieve any kind of that success, that you convince yourself that if you had it, you'd be happy. So in an odd way, you duck the question by not being able to get mainstream success. It's kind of double sad because you don't get what you want, and also you're misled about what might make you happy. If people would say, listen to Clark, elitist nonsense. Trust me, if I had a good job and some money, I'd be happy. Okay, but you wouldn't, okay? Because those things are not adequate to a thoughtful human being. Another thing some people do is just throw it all off, reject it utterly. Our world goes hard on people who take that choice, who really throw off it's hard, okay? We all probably have people close to us who have tried to do that, just not play the game at all. It goes hard on them. And sometimes, ironically, they are forced to compromise more to survive when they're thrown off, right? It's difficult, right? We too are trapped. We too are trapped, and we can't just pragmatically or even sometimes imaginatively. And not only do we sometimes realize it's inadequate to our happiness, I don't know why I'm pointing at you. Not only do we realize, but sometimes we see that that makes us complicit in some ugliness too. And this is not a lecture about economic inequality or people but the fact is, okay, that success in the terms of our culture does in some way implicate us in some of our society's real uglinesses, right? And so we got to figure out, what do we do? And our situation is not that different in that way, in broad strokes. We could see theirs better because, we could see from above, that was a social construct and it's adequate in these ways. And we're in the middle, we say, no, it's just success. Like if I had a nice car and a nice job and a nice house, I would be fine, that's okay. Okay, but no, okay, in a sense. So that's the problem, how to live well in a jacked up world, right? I don't mean to be glib, right? But that's the problem. And so what can we learn from Patroclus about that? Okay, so when Patroclus is killed, they have, first let me tell you who he is. Let me tell you who this fella is. Patroclus was a young prince, and when he was young, this is important, when he was young, he killed another young guy in a fight over some kind of game, some kind of dice game. So although he turned out to be, a counselor, the best of the Achaeans, all the rest of it, at least started out imperfect. And then his father had to send him away, okay? Menoetius was his father, had sent him away to the kingdom of his friend Peleus. He said, you got to get out of here, right? And we think of Don Corleone has to send Michael somewhere, hide out, lay low for a while, right? Okay? And so he said, Menoetius says, you got to go lay low for a while we let this, you just killed the kid and you got to get out of here. So he goes to stay with Peleus, and Peleus has a son, and the son is Achilles. Achilles is younger than Patroclus. A lot of times we think Patroclus is younger. Achilles is younger than Patroclus, and Patroclus becomes kind of a role model companion to Achilles in Peleus' kingdom. And this is where most of the writing about Patroclus is obsessed with whether they're having sex or not. And I don't care about that. I mean, fine, if you want to write about that, fine, I'll hold it against you. But that's not what I want to emphasize, right? I think that's an example of trying to squeeze other people into models of our culture, right? Like, we want to know, what were they? It's like people used to say, if they would meet a gay couple, they would say something stupid like, well, which one's the man, which one's the woman? Like they had to squeeze that couple into some construct that they were familiar with. We're kind of doing the same thing when we did. So I'm not worried about that. Instead, I want to think about Patroclus as a human being. So they go together to war, and eventually what's going to happen is that the battle's going to go badly while Achilles is moping. Achilles is moping because Agamemnon insulted him by taking his girl, who he had stolen and kidnapped, by the way. So, okay, don't get too self-righteous, Achilles. You kidnapped her in the first place, but didn't see that, doesn't see that, right? So the battle is going badly, and eventually what's going to happen is Patroclus is going to convince Achilles to let him use his armor. He's going to go to battle in Achilles' armor, he's going to get killed. Then they're going to have funeral games for Patroclus, huge funeral games, which they don't have for anyone else. That's going to get Achilles fired up enough, and then Achilles is going to go on a rampage and kill Hector. And eventually they're going to take Troy. So what can we learn about the character of Patroclus? Okay, good. What are the traits that make, because after he dies, that's when they start calling him the best of the Achaeans. And having giant funeral games for him. And so the question is, what is it about Patroclus that allows him to be considered the best, even though he isn't the best in any of the ways that they traditionally associated with success? So if you were to find a person in your life, in our life, who everybody admires, but who does not have most or all of the traits that you might think are required to be admired in our society, you would take note. you would say, okay, wait a minute, here's an example of someone who has managed to somehow live well in a messed up world, right? To be something at least slightly beyond his world. So we see him in three places mainly. One is book 9. That's the place where Achilles is going to talk about how the war is pointless. And all we see there, we don't really learn a lot about Patroclus there, but we see him behave in a very gracious and poised way. He serves people, he greets people appropriately, he speaks well. Was tempted to try to put more and more of Patroclus' speeches and but it's really hard to capture the tone. He speaks gracefully and well. One of the, it's so hard to describe that. You know how like when you meet someone and they have a way of speaking and it's just hard to put your finger on, and it's easy to miss and impossible to see in translation, but there's something there about the way he speaks. And so I want to just say in book 9 we see that he does not petulantly disdain the norms of his culture. One thing we might be tempted to do if we see that our culture is inadequate to our happiness and makes us complicit in some mess we don't want to be complicit in, is what might be tempted to flip it off, indulge our weirdness, behave intentionally at odds with cultural expectations. Just say, I don't care. And that's okay. I mean, you could totally do that. But that comes at the cost of efficacy. Right? So you can say, I'm just going to be aggressively weird, and I'm not going to adhere to social norms. Okay? And if that makes all the people I deal with uncomfortable, well, they shouldn't be, because it doesn't have anything to do with my value as a human being. I'm just going to be aggressively whatever. Okay, right? But there's a little bit of self-indulgence in that. Okay? To show up stinky and tatted up and scornful of social norms might seem like a display of courage. And I love tattoos. My youngest daughter is head to toe. Beautiful. But it's also a self-indulgence, right? So one thing Patroclus might give us is an idea of how it's possible to be both good and effective. So that's one thing he doesn't do. But there's a risk, a real risk there, that when you accept norms, you are complicit in them. I think about this, 38-second aside, because we talked about the way, this is not an aside, this is on the point. We talked about how Patroclus speaks, so we have the same thing, like grammar, okay? Using grammar and pronunciation and speech in certain ways. My parents growing up, my mom especially, was insistent that my brothers and I learn to speak correctly. And she would have said that that was so that we could express ourselves clearly. And it was, but it was also so that people could tell we were the right kind of people. Okay? And although I'm glad that they taught us that, that does in fact make us complicit in a class system that allows me, right? Right? Grammar? Well, I can understand what people are saying, whether they say ask or ax. Okay? The only difference between ask and ax is it enables me to peg your education level and racial background. So when you comply with social norms, like Patroclus does, you risk being complicit. And so, maybe I should back off my critique of the aggressively weird, because at least they're not helping to reinforce a set of arbitrary social norms that operate to the exclusion of people. So I told you I wasn't going to solve the problem. I was just going to highlight it, right? Then we see in book 11, we get to see Patroclus a little more closely. See, book 11, Achilles is moping, and Patroclus is keeping him company. And then he starts to hear that things are going very badly for the Greeks. They're dragging wounded people back and things are going bad. And he's like, Patroclus, go find out what's going on. And Patroclus goes running to find out what's going on. And he wants to go ask Nestor. Nestor's the old kind of blowhard, always telling old stories. Back in my day, when men were men, make Greece great again. Nestor was kind of, so Patroclus goes to ask him what's going on. And there we see a couple things. First, we see that he is, again, gracious. He listens to Nestor even when he goes off and says, let me tell you about a battle I fought back in my day. And you know, Patroclus is like, look, like, would you get to the point here? And so he shows that. Then he shows his perception, is when he finally chides Nestor. He gracefully says, look, I got to get back to Achilles. And he says, you know how he is. You know how he gets mad. Even when people didn't do it, so can you let me go? Because you know how he says, you know how he is. So in that kind of line, Patroclus shows double layers of perception. He shows his perception of how to communicate with Nestor by attributing to him a kind of knowledge of human nature. You know, and then he shows his knowledge of Achilles. So the other thing we see about Patroclus is perceptive about people, perceptive about what moves them, what worries them, what kind of people they are. So if we are to be effective in any kind of world, messed up or otherwise, that's something we need. I'm a law professor. I'm always teaching my students, like, you can make all the clever logical arguments in the world, but if the argument you make does not speak to the thing that worries the person with whom you are speaking, then you're not going to succeed. You need to figure out where that person's coming from. And if all you can say is that they're racist or they're stupid or whatever, like, you're not doing it, okay? Because they don't wake up and say, how can I be a stupid racist today? That's not what they did. They have some way of understanding the world in which they think their thing makes sense. You don't have to agree with that. You probably won't agree with that, but if you're going to be effective. So Patroclus shows that capacity, that what I want to call kind of engaged empathy that comes through in the way he speaks. So he shows an ability to work within his cultural norms gracefully, a kind of poise. Yes, can I use that word? He shows perception, the ability to understand what will move somebody. Then the next thing that happens is there's a wounded guy, Eurypylus. Now, you know he's in a hurry because Nestor has just bored Patroclus with this long story about a battle 3 generations ago. He's got to get back to Achilles, who is steaming, and then up comes Eurypylus injured. And Patroclus takes care of it. He stops, he cares for him. He helps him with his wound and talks gently to him. So there's something else. He cares about the people that he encounters, not just his people, but the actual human beings that run across in front of him. He actually will lay his hands on care about a person. So that's a thing. One, is that a key to succeeding in? I don't know, right? But that's what he does. They're going to call him the best of the Achaeans, and I'm just saying, what does he do that might make somebody call him that? And that's one thing he does. He's perceptive, he's poised, and he's caring. He cares for the people that are hurting in front of him. Even when he's in a hurry because he's got me and Achilles about to whip his butt when he gets back. Plus, he's competent. He knows how. He mixes up some kind of salve or something, some honey and wine or some kind of, I don't know if I'd recommend ancient Greek medicine, but he mixes up something to rub on the thing. But he's competent and knowledgeable. Okay? So what do we got? Is somebody gonna call you the best of the Achaeans? Okay, poise, perception, caring for the people in front of you, competence. Can you do something? Can you handle your business? Okay, nobody needs, well-meaning bumbling incompetence is not going to get you called the best of anything, right? So he's competent. So far, so good. He finally goes back to Achilles, and now we learn something about him. I want to say what he does in book 16 in a second, but two other things that people call him. I ran out of chalk because, look, he gave me this little piece of chalk. What am I supposed to do with that? This is an august occasion. Be serious. Okay. They call him also, wait, let me get it exactly right. They also, in addition to calling him the best of the Achaeans, they, get the phrases exactly right? Enea to Cretaranta. Gentle, both gentle and strong. He's described that way a couple times. Enea to Cretaranta. The double to means both. He's both gentle, and there the word gentle, the Enea word, has connotations like gentility, not just like physical gentle, but like similar to what we might like gentleman kind of word. He's gentle, gracious, but also has the connotation of physical gentleness. He's gentle and strong. Krataranta. The krat word is a power word. Doesn't just mean physical strength, although it does. It also is a word that implies power, might. So you would say he's gracious and mighty, he's both kind and strong. So he's both of those things, somehow combines the gentility with the strength. And then the other thing they call him, Theophan Maestor Atalantos. Theophan means like the gods. Theo, then is the dative ending. Maestor in that context, very odd word. Maestor in that context means counselor or advisor. It's very rare. And only one at a time in all the corpus is somebody called this Maester Theophan Atalantos, Theophan Maester Atalantos, a counselor equal to the gods. And that's when Zeus is listing all of his sons, and he's got to come up with an epithet for all of them, and he's got about 1 million of them, and he uses that for one of them. But other than that, it's only Patroclus, who is counselor like the gods. So somehow he's described as both the best of the Achaeans, somehow both gentle, but also mighty, strong, and in a way that makes him a good counselor or advisor, that his strength, his efficacy manifests itself in the way he speaks to people. The way he speaks to people. Now, things are not going to go real well, because in book 16, he recognizes he's not going to be able to convince Achilles to go fight. He's not afraid to call him out. He does call him out. He said, what is the point of your pouting? What is the point? What good are you to anybody pouting? What good will you be to future generations you up here pouting? But he said, but if some prophecy or something makes you unwilling to fight, at least give me your armor and let me go fight. So he shows a willingness. What is that phrase they use? Speak truth to power. He shows a willingness to speak up, even in the face of someone he just said he knows is going to get mad and probably won't convince. Okay, so we got someone who is gracious, someone who is perceptive, someone who is caring and competent, someone who is strong but also kind, someone who is willing to speak up but realistic about the limits of persuasion. And finally he says, all right, give me your army, let me go fight. He's willing to put himself on the line. He's willing to sacrifice. That sacrifice does not, maybe it was inevitable, necessary, either for him or as a literary matter, but it doesn't work out. He gets killed. It doesn't work out in the short term. So I don't know what to make of Patroclus' decision to put on Achilles' armor and fight. I don't know what to make of it. As a literary arc, you think anybody that age that's the paragon of excellence in any tradition has got to die at that age. Okay? Bob Marley, Jesus. You got to go at that age in order to represent that time. As a literary, something about that, right? You can't hang around and still be touring when you're 68 years old. Although, hey, bands still sound great to me, but somehow you don't carry the same place in your culture's imagination if you're still touring, okay? So Paul McCartney and John Lennon do not stand for the same sort of thing in our collective cultural imagination, okay? Part of it is because Lennon's the one. Imagine there's no light. He was more of a vision, but part of it is because, so maybe it's that, I don't know. I think it's good to say, it's sensible to add to our list, like, okay, so I already said we're not going to solve the problem, okay? So, but we have a set of things. We found somebody, like I knew this Jesuit brother when I was a teenager, Brother Cawthorn at Loyola High School up in Baltimore before I dropped out, or they kicked me out. That's disputed, okay? or my dad ran out of money. That's possible too. The mist of history can conceal all sorts of wonders. But Brother Cawthorn was this kind of person for me. Because like you go up in Baltimore, you think, well, I know what success means. You got a big car, right? You got cool clothes, you're great at sports, you got a pretty girlfriend, whatever. Like the things you gotta have so people admire you. And then everybody admire Brother Cawthorn. He's Jesuit brother dressed in black, doesn't have anything. No car, girlfriend, clothes, nothing. And we all admire him, just because the kind of man he was. So it made me think, what is it about that man that can make you admirable, even though you don't have what on the surface your culture seems to be telling you you need? Well, that's who Patroclus is. Maybe. We could find those people in our own lives, and we should cherish them. We should give them their props and respect them, right? We find we find it in Patroclus. So we see these features. I won't keep listing them over and over again. Caring, perceptive, poised, courageous enough to speak truth to power, caring, competent, able to engage and understand where people are coming from. Maybe some of those are some of the traits we can nurture if we want to figure out how we can live effectively in this crazy world in a way that's adequate and also help make it, maybe even make it better at the margins. And in the end, though, you wonder what to make of his sacrifice. I mean, maybe it was the wrong sacrifice. I don't know what that would even mean, but maybe it's kind of a self-indulgence to say, well, I'm just going to put on armor and go get killed. I don't know. Maybe what we need to be able to sacrifice is not that, but some of what the world tells us we ought to want or something. I don't know. Maybe there's no way out. Maybe Patroclus was completely trapped within his world and there's really no way out, and that's why Jesus and Bob Marley and Patroclus all had to die at that age, right? I don't know the answer to that. All I can know is that when we see people who seem to transcend their time, who seem to hold a place in our memory and imagination as giving witness to the possibility of transcending the inadequacy of our times, then we ought to look and see what kind of people they were and see what we can take from them, right? Okay, is that enough?